this? 2x. What's the square root of 25? Plus or minus 5. One side or the other, you're going to put the plus or minus. It never matters which side. I always put it on the side that doesn't have the letter. That's easier for me. Now, I'm still not done, though. What is x going to equal? Plus or minus 5 over 2. That's the answer to the question. So it's that simple, kids. If you have a square equal to a square, take the square root of both sides, and there are your two answers. Now, this one looks more complicated, but it isn't. We're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to take the square root of both sides. Now, what happens when you square root a square? They cancel out. Square roots and squares cancel out. So what does this side equal? X minus 3. What does this side equal? I love it. Somebody said plus or minus 5. And whoever said that is right. Plus or minus. Remember, when you use this method, one side has to be plus or minus. Always. And I like to do the side with no letter. I'm not done though. What do I need to do?
Add 3.
Add 3. Now be careful. When you add 3, you're going to have plus 5 plus 3, but you're also going to have minus 5 plus 3. Does everybody see that? Because it's a positive 5 or a negative 5, and you're going to add 3 to both of those. So what's plus 5 plus 3?
8.
8. What's minus 5 plus 3?
-2.
Negative 2. There are your answers.
Wait, is that why there were 2?
All right, let's look at the next one. What might we do first? Mr. Rocap? Divide by 3. I would absolutely divide both sides by 3. There's no reason not to. That leaves me with x minus 4 squared equal to 3. Right?
Yeah.
Now I'll take the square root of both sides, and what will that leave me with? Abby Brady, what's going to happen over here when I take the square root of a square? That's right, these cancel and leave me with x minus 4. And what am I going to have over here? Plus or minus the square root of 3. Groupies, I wish the whole world were perfect squares, but it's not. We're going to have radicals in our answers.
No.
But it is plus or minus. Remember, when you solve an equation using this method, you've got to have a plus or minus on one side. We're not done though. What do we need to do? Add 4. X equals 4 plus or minus root 3. Now you are allowed to write it that way, or if you prefer, you can write 4 plus root 3, 4 minus root 3, because that's what's happening here. You have a positive root 3 and a negative root 3. I like to write it all together in one piece, but you can certainly do it separately if that's easier for you. Bryce, you following along okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Maya?
Why is the plus or minus in between the 4 and the 3?
Well, I need to add together. Okay, are you saying why don't I write plus or minus 3 plus 4?
No, well, yeah.
Okay, it could be either one, doesn't matter.
Okay.
Normally, and this is just kind of, there's really no reason for it, but it's kind of traditionally, we put the radical last. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. If you were looking at the answer in the back of the book, they would write it this way. Okay, let's look at D. And then I'm going to give you a chance to practice a couple. Okay? Let's see. How about some Katie over there at that table? One of you. Step 1.
Square root of
Square root both sides. And other Katie, what happens when I take the square root of a square? It cancels, leaving me with only 2x plus 1.
Equals 4.
Be careful.
Oh, plus or minus 4.
Yes, plus or minus 4. Remember when we solve an equation using this procedure, one side has to have the plus or minus. Okay? Now, this is really two equations. I hope you see that. It's 2x plus 1 equals 4, but it's also 2x plus 1 equals negative 4. You got to do both. They're going to be different. So 2x equals 3, and x equals 3/2. Is that too fast? I subtracted 1 from both sides and then divided by 2. On this side, 2x equals negative 5, so x equals negative 5/2. You okay with that? All right, I need a couple of volunteers. I'm going to put a couple more problems on the board. We're out on the note sheet, but I'll just make up a couple. And I want a couple volunteers to come up and do it. I'll make them the harder kind. How about? Come on up. Bring a partner if you want. Or go by yourself if you want. All right, and now what should the rest of us be doing? Yep, solving them, so you can either do it in your notebook or there's a little room over on the side of the note sheet, write it down. Well, let's go ahead and do these.
That's why I never went to the kids. So I was in the woods.
Are we gonna get into a fight about that? So I'm gonna be highly entertained and perceived.
She just looks like fresh nails.
So the first thing I saw was this one thing, and it was probably a burger. Oh, it must be
She just doesn't like sweets and stuff.
I was like, there's a hamburger.
She made the time it was
It's
awful.
exactly like a hamburger. He said,
That's not healthy. I'm just saying, you don't really like sweets and stuff.
No, never mind, you're good.
yeah, I don't like the hamburger that one. I don't really like it.
You doing these? You got a uniform shirt on under there? Okay, here's the deal. We always wear a uniform shirt under our college sweatshirt. Everybody clear on that rule? I'm going to do random checks. So let's make sure that we have a uniform shirt under our college sweatshirt at all times, Miss Brady. Got it? This is your warning. It's everybody's warning. Next time I'm just going to start writing detentions, okay? Let's take a look at what the kids did up here. Let's see how they did. Would you agree? Oh, look, whoever did this wrote the 5 and the negative 5 separately. Instead of saying plus or minus, wrote them separately. That's fine. So 3x plus 1 equals 5. Good. Or 3x plus 1 equals negative 5, negative 6. Well, that looks pretty good. That's pretty good. Anybody have a question about that problem?
So it's two separate equations.
It is after you take the square root. It's two separate equations. This one looks awesome also, divided by 4. Probably want to make sure we put that plus or minus there. It came in down here, so that's fine. And there's the answer. Or it could be this. Remember, I talked about that a minute ago with Maya. Either one is fine. Everybody okay with that? So there's 4 ways we're going to solve quadratic equations, and you're halfway done. You've learned 2 of them. What's one way? Graphing on the calculator. What's this way?
So much better.
Taking the square root of both sides, right?
Yeah.
Now, the third way we're going to talk about, and we will not get all the way through this today. So don't panic, because this way's a little bit more complicated. Let's look at our note sheet. Part 3, completing the square. Now, how many of you remember completing the square last year?
I remember, but I will need a little crash course.
Okay, but you remember the word anyway, completing the square, right?
Something I should know.
Exactly. Okay, that's okay, because I'm going to help you through it again, okay? So here's how it works. Before we can complete the square, there are a couple of things that have to happen in the equation before you get started. The first thing, and I need you to pay attention to this because it's not an issue in this problem, but I still have to pay attention to it. Whatever this coefficient is right here, this coefficient must be 1. If this number right here isn't a 1, we got to make it a 1. Look, if you would, at problem C. In this section, problem C. You see what I'm talking about? What's the leading coefficient there? 2. So the very first thing when we get to that problem, the very first thing we're going to do is divide everything by 2. Okay? You cannot complete the square, groupies, until that number is a 1. The other thing that has to happen, there's 2 things before we get started with completing the square. The other thing that has to happen is this guy has to be moved to this side. This is called the constant term. It's the number, has no variable. That has to be moved to the other side. So that's easy. Added 7 to both sides. Everybody okay with that? Nothing tricky. We added 7 to both sides. Now, it's ready to complete the square. Does anybody remember, we're going to add something to both sides. Does anybody remember how we get the thing we add?
Oh, I think I do. It has to, hold on, it's a little trick. It doesn't have to multiply to -6, but add to the 7.
No, you're getting confused with something else. It's a good idea, but you're getting confused with something else.
I know it again. I remember this.
You take half of this guy and square it. We take half of the x term. So what's half of 6?
-3.
3. And squared would be 9. So I'm going to add 9 to both sides. Now let me say that again. You take half of the plain x term. So half of 6 is 3. And then you square it and get 9. And that's what you add. Now, I know that's a -6. So you might be saying, well, Mrs. Ford, why don't you take -3? Well, it doesn't really matter because I'm going to square it, right?
Yes.
And so it's always going to be a positive number that I add.
Yes.
Now, why did we do that? We did that so that this would become a perfect square parentheses. What perfect square parentheses would equal this right here if I multiplied it out? Somebody said x minus 3. All I hear is this deep voice saying x minus 3. That is correct. It is x minus 3. X minus 3 squared equals 16?
Yeah.
Now, kids, this looks exactly like the problems we just finished. This is exactly the same thing now at this point. So what am I going to do you think? I'm going to square root both sides. And what happens when I square root x minus 3 squared? It's x minus 3 equal to plus or minus 4?
Yeah.
So x minus 3 equals positive 4, or x minus 3 equals negative 4. So x either equals 7 or x equals negative 1. You just completed the square. All right, let's try the next one.
She added the plus because you have to solve. So you take half of 6, then you square it. Then you add 2.
Okay, everybody looking at problem B now? Okay, remember, before you complete the square, the math conversation back there?
Yes.
Okay, as long as it's a math conversation. You wouldn't lie to me, would you, Miss Brownlow?
It was actually math. It was math.
Okay, math conversations are fine. All right, before we complete the square, 2 things have to happen. This number has to be a 1. It is, yes. This number has to be moved over, so I need to do that. So I'm going to say this one more time, and I'd love it if we were letting this sink in. Before I begin this problem, before I complete the square, 2 things have to happen. That number has to be a 1. It is, so I'm good. This number has to be added to the other side. Now I'm ready to go. Now I'm ready to add something to both sides. Half of 8 is 4, squared is 16. So somewhere in the back of your brain, you've got to remember, take half and square it. Half and square it. The reason that you did that was so that this would be a square. This right here should be a square. What square would this be?
X plus 4.
Very good, Mr. Ehrlich. X plus 4. Equal to 18. Miss Willis, what happens now?
Oh, then you do x plus 4
Equals?
square root 18.
Very good, plus or minus. So in other words, you want me to take the square root of both sides at this point. These will cancel, and x plus 4, like she said, equals plus or minus the square root of 18. Now, how about 18?
3 radical 2.
That needs to be broken down, and whoever said 3 radical 2 is exactly right, but let's break it down, make sure everybody's on the same page. See 2 3s? That's how we got 3 root 2, plus or minus, of course. And now what? Subtract 4. So negative 4 plus or minus 3 root 2. Or plus or minus 3 root 2 minus 4, if you like it better in that order. Okay, Brooke, what was your question?
For, like, when it says on the previous problem, x minus 3, why is that one minus and that one is plus? Like, for the, oh, okay.
All right, we good so far? All right, let's tackle C. That's a tougher problem.
What one? Is that plus or minus?
Yeah. 3 root 2 minus 4. What one? The last one?
No, they were pointing to the same one.
Equals
Okay, we're on
4
C.
plus 3 root 2.
Doing it by ourselves.
Everybody paying attention? Step 1. Very good. We're going to divide by 2. Perfect. When I divide by 2, gang, I have to make sure that I divide everything by 2. Not just some stuff, everything. Next step. Move the 2 over. Very good. And it's 25 because why, William?
Divide by 2.
And
5
square it, exactly. So Will says I'm going to add 25 to both sides. And I'm adding 25, Gibran, because half of 10 is 5, and 5 squared is 25. Now notice that I added it to both sides. You can't add it just once. You got to add it on both sides of the equation to keep everything balanced. Okay, Brooke, help me out. What square is this?
X minus 5.
Perfect. And it's going to equal 23.
Yep.
And then Baumgartner, what's the next step?
You have to square root it.
Yep. And when I square root it, I'm really careful to remember the plus or minus over here. And Katie, what's the square root of x minus 5 squared?
X minus 5.
Yep. So, Julia, what will be the answer to the question?
Is it plus or minus radical 23 minus 5?
Be careful. What
Oh,
is it?
plus 5.
Plus 5. There you go. Perfect. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Olivia?
Does it matter which order, like if you put 5 plus or minus?
Nope. Nope, that would be fine. 5 plus or minus root 23. Olivia, that's the way I would write it myself personally, but it makes absolutely no difference. These are the same thing.
If you wrote it the second way, would it just like, would you need to write another plus or minus and like 5?
Okay, wait a second, honey. What did you say?
If you wrote it the second way, like the 5, would you need to write another plus or minus?
The 5 is not plus or minus. The 5 is just 5, just positive 5, because it's getting added over. It's only the root that's the plus or minus. All right, at your table, with your table mates. I want you to try this one.
Are you going to try and go off the when you guys go?
Okay, table mate, table people, here we go. Everybody's working on this together. Wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute.
I need Brian to play by myself.
Really?
Yeah. From high school.
I'm sorry, I messed up. I know.
She's like, they go to
Different states.
Okay, what should be happening now? We should, at our table, we should all be working on this problem, right? Helping each other. Jabron? Do I have to cause bodily harm?
Do it, please. I want to see it.
squared plus 12. Pam, we're gonna have a problem all year if you're talking out loud. I used to be put in a room in elementary school and intermediate because I talked to myself. So, I know where you're coming from. But. I'm not getting out of this speech. I'm not going to do this by myself.
So do you have 4?
Yep.
X squared plus 4x.
Okay, so let's subtract 3 first.
That's the one right there.
Equals minus 3.
Do the
So
square root.
2 times
Can you
2
not
is 4. Plus
What's the square? What's the middle square? X plus 2.
It's 1.
This would be x minus 2. It would be 4, right? 4 divided by 2, and then 2 times 4 is plus 2. Is that what you got for x squared?
Or wait, is the perfect square x plus 2?
Yep.
And then would it just be equals 1?
Plus 1 minus x equals
Did 3 and then 4.
yeah. Wait, so I'm not delusional, right? You guys got 2 for your one that you divide by 4. Okay.
Okay, so square root of 1 is 1.
It would be negative 3.
It's just a square root.
It's negative 3 equals
Do you keep the square root?
I don't think so. I think you get rid of it.
Oh, if you get rid of it,
Then you have to finish
So
it out.
negative 3
Yeah.
subtract. I just cut the side.
Yeah. So then you have to finish it. X plus 2 equals.
How did you start this problem? I think that's a wonderful way to start. And then Thomas Berg, what did you do next?
I got x to the second plus 4x plus 3 equals 0. And then after that, that's where it is x to the second plus 2x plus 4.
No, the
Wait.